Ted Kaczynski. From 1978 to 1995, the Unabomber sent explosive packages through the mail that killed 3 people and left 23 others injured. The resulting FBI investigation became one of the costliest in the Bureau's history. In 1995, he submitted a 35,000-word manifesto to newspaper outlets. The Washington Post and the New York Times published it on September 19, 1995. His brother David read the manifesto, identified Ted's distinctive writing style, and reported him to authorities. On April 3, 1996, FBI agents descended on a remote cabin outside Lincoln, Montana. Ted Kaczynski, aged 53, had been living there alone with no electricity. Agents searching the property found bomb-making materials and a detailed personal journal. On January 22, 1998, with a death sentence on the table, Kaczynski entered a guilty plea in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. On June 10, 2023, he was found dead in his cell at the age of 81. The investigation had spanned 17 years. Radovan Karadzic held the presidency of Republika Srpska throughout the Bosnian War from 1992 to 1995. He directed the siege of Sarajevo, which stretched across 1,425 days and resulted in the deaths of more than 11,000 civilians. In July 1995, Bosnian Serb units under his command massacred around 8,000 Bosniak men and boys at Srebrenica. On July 25, 1995, the International Criminal Tribunal indicted him on charges of genocide and war crimes. For 13 years, he evaded capture, living under the assumed name Dragan Dabic and offering alternative medicine consultations in Belgrade. On July 21, 2008, Serbian intelligence officers located him riding a bus and took him into custody without a struggle. His trial got underway on October 26, 2009. On March 24, 2016, he was convicted and handed a 40-year sentence. On appeal, that sentence was raised to life imprisonment on March 20, 2019. Karadzic is currently held at a UN detention facility. He is 80 years old. Saddam Hussein governed Iraq as its dictator from 1979 to 2003. In 1988, he deployed chemical weapons against Kurdish civilians in Halabja, killing 5,000 people. On March 20, 2003, American forces launched an invasion of Iraq. Baghdad fell within 3 weeks. Saddam vanished. A reward of $25 million was announced. On December 13, 2003, soldiers raided a farmhouse near Tikrit. They found disturbed ground near a mud hut. Beneath a layer of styrofoam and a rug was a hole in the earth 6 feet deep. Saddam was inside, disheveled and bearded. He gave himself up without a fight. His trial began on October 19, 2005. On November 5, 2006, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. On December 30, 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed by hanging. He was 69 years old. Adolf Eichmann oversaw the logistical planning of the Holocaust, coordinating the mass deportation of millions of Jewish people to concentration camps. After the war, he fled to Argentina in 1950, traveling on a Red Cross document under the name Ricardo Clement. He settled openly in Buenos Aires and took a job at a Mercedes-Benz factory. In 1960, Mossad agents verified his identity. On May 11, 1960, they grabbed him close to his home and moved him to a safe house. On May 20th, they got him onto an El Al flight bound for Israel, disguised as a crew member suffering from illness. His trial opened on April 11, 1961 in Jerusalem. On December 15th, he was found guilty and condemned to death. On May 31, 1962, Eichmann was executed by the State of Israel. Pablo Escobar. At the height of his operation in the late 1980s, Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel was responsible for supplying 80% of the world's cocaine, pulling in an estimated $420 million every week. He sanctioned the murders of hundreds of judges, police officers, journalists, and politicians who stood in his way. In 1989, he arranged the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, which killed all 107 people on board. In 1991, as pressure mounted, Escobar worked out a surrender arrangement with the Colombian government. The terms allowed him to serve a maximum of 5 years in a custom-built facility called La Catedral, which he had designed himself and which included a football field, a bar, and a jacuzzi. He carried on running his drug empire from inside. On July 22, 1992, after learning that officials intended to move him to a proper prison, he walked out with 9 of his associates. The Colombian government assembled a dedicated unit called Search Block to hunt him down. The United States supplied intelligence assistance and electronic tracking equipment. Escobar regularly called his family, and those calls gave him away. Authorities used radio direction-finding gear to trace his location. On December 2, 1993, electronic surveillance pinpointed him to a residential address in Medellin. Search block moved in at 3 in the afternoon. Escobar and his bodyguard tried to escape by running across the rooftops. Colombian police shot them both. Escobar took hits to the leg, torso, and ear and died on the rooftop at 44 years old. More than 25,000 people came to his funeral. Joseph Kony. Joseph Kony established the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda in 1987. Over 3 decades, the LRA seized approximately 66,000 children, turning boys into fighters and girls into sexual slaves for commanders. In 2005, the International Criminal Court issued warrants for his arrest. A reward of $5 million was put up for information leading to his capture. In 2011, President Obama deployed 100 U.S. military advisors to support African forces hunting him down. In 2012, the Kony 2012 campaign spread across the internet and brought his crimes to worldwide attention. Despite the pressure and resources committed to finding him, Kony remained free. By 2017, the LRA had been reduced to fewer than 100 fighters. That same year, the U.S. pulled its forces out, determining the threat had diminished sufficiently. As of 2025, Joseph Kony is still at large, having avoided capture for more than 30 years. Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was employed as an NSA contractor. In 2013, he copied a collection of classified documents that exposed mass government surveillance programs. On May 20, 2013, he boarded a flight from Hawaii to Hong Kong, carrying encrypted files with him. On June 5th, The Guardian ran the first story based on his leaks. On June 14th, federal prosecutors filed charges against him for theft and violations of the Espionage Act. The State Department canceled his passport. On June 23rd, he departed Hong Kong on a flight to Moscow, but found himself unable to leave the airport. He spent 39 days living inside the terminal's transit zone. On August 1, 2013, Russia approved his asylum request. In 2020, he was granted permanent residency in Russia. Some regard him as a hero, others regard him as a traitor. As of 2025, Snowden is still living in Russia, where he has remained a wanted man in the United States for 12 years. Carlos the Jackal. Ilich Ramirez Sanchez, better known as Carlos the Jackal, ranked among the most hunted terrorists of the 1970s and 1980s. A native of Venezuela, he joined the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. In 1975, he led an assault on OPEC headquarters in Vienna, taking 11 oil ministers as hostages. 3 people died in the operation. He set off bombs in cafes, on trains, and in shops throughout France, leaving dozens dead. Investigators connected him to a minimum of 11 killings. He moved freely between communist-aligned countries that offered him protection. Once the Cold War ended, those havens dried up. On August 14, 1994, French agents tracked him down in Sudan, drugged him, put him in a sack, and flew him back to France. 3 separate trials found him guilty of multiple murders. He was handed 3 life sentences. Carlos has been imprisoned in a high-security French facility for 31 years. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Joaquin Guzman ran the Sinaloa cartel, one of the largest and most powerful drug trafficking operations in the world. His organization moved massive quantities of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine into the United States. He was first picked up in Guatemala in 1993 and sent to Mexico, where he received a 20-year sentence at Puente Grande Maximum Security Prison. On January 19, 2001, he slipped out concealed inside a laundry cart after paying off guards. He spent the next 13 years free, continuing to run his cartel from hiding. Forbes magazine placed him on its list of the world's most powerful people. The U.S. placed a $5 million bounty on him. On February 22, 2014, Mexican Marines caught up with him at a hotel in Mazatlan. He was transferred to Altiplano Prison, the most secure facility in Mexico. On July 11, 2015, guards discovered his cell was empty. He had gone out through a tunnel running almost a mile in length, 30 feet below ground, fitted with electric lighting, a ventilation system, and a motorcycle mounted on rails. The tunnel had taken more than a year to dig. On January 8, 2016, Marines raided a property in Los Mochis. A firefight broke out. 5 cartel members were killed. Guzman fled through a drainage tunnel, came up through a street manhole, and took a car. Police stopped him on the highway an hour later. This time, Mexico handed him over to the United States. On January 19, 2017, 16 years to the day after his first escape, he landed in New York. His trial opened on November 5, 2018. On February 12, 2019, the jury returned guilty verdicts on every count. On July 17, 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. He is held at ADX Florence, the federal supermax facility in Colorado. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler led Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945, starting the Second World War and overseeing the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were murdered. By April 1945, Soviet forces were advancing on Berlin. On April 20th, Hitler marked his 56th birthday inside his underground bunker. On April 22nd, he acknowledged that defeat was unavoidable. On April 29th, he married Eva Braun. On April 30th, 1945, at around 3:30 in the afternoon, Hitler shot himself in the head. Braun took cyanide beside him. Aides carried their bodies up into the garden, poured petrol over them, and set them alight. Soviet forces were less than 1,000 feet away. On May 2nd, Soviet troops took the Reich Chancellery and recovered the burned remains. In 1970, the KGB exhumed the remains, cremated them entirely, and scattered the ashes in a river. Hitler was never taken alive. Ayman al-Zawahiri. Ayman al-Zawahiri served as Osama bin Laden's deputy and played a central role in planning the 1998 U.S. embassy bombings that killed 224 people. Following bin Laden's death in 2011, he stepped up as al-Qaeda's leader. A bounty of $25 million was placed on him. For more than 20 years, he stayed out of reach. In 2022, the CIA pinpointed a safe house in Kabul's Sherpur district. Surveillance teams observed al-Zawahiri stepping onto the balcony each morning without fail. On July 31, 2022, at 6:18 in the morning, a U.S. drone put 2 Hellfire missiles into the balcony. Al-Zawahiri was killed on the spot. Nobody else was hurt. The Taliban subsequently confirmed his death. He had been a wanted man for 24 years. Osama bin Laden. On September 11, 2001, 19 hijackers killed close to 3,000 people in coordinated strikes on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and United Airlines Flight 93. Within days, investigators had identified Osama bin Laden as the mastermind behind the attacks. Bin Laden had set up al-Qaeda in 1988 and issued a declaration of war against the United States in 1996. The FBI added him to their most wanted list and put up a $25 million reward, the largest bounty ever offered. U.S. forces entered Afghanistan in October 2001, targeting the Taliban government sheltering him. He withdrew into the mountainous Tora Bora region in December 2001. American aircraft pounded the cave networks for weeks, but bin Laden crossed the border into Pakistan. He stayed hidden for nearly 10 years. CIA operatives followed the trail of his courier network across Pakistan. In August 2010, they zeroed in on a suspicious compound in Abbottabad, 35 miles from Islamabad. The walls stood 18 feet high and were lined with barbed wire. There was no internet connection on the property. On May 2, 2011, 23 Navy SEALs flew into Pakistan aboard 2 helicopters. They entered the compound at 1 in the morning, worked through the building room by room, and reached the 3rd floor. Bin Laden appeared in a doorway. The SEALs fired multiple rounds, striking him in the head and chest. He died at the scene. The entire operation took 38 minutes. His body was flown to Afghanistan for identification and then buried at sea. The hunt had lasted 9 years and 7 months.